Welcome back to Les Schwab Tire Center's Outdoor GPS, presented by Fisherman's Marine and Outdoor.
Okay, so we get a lot of questions on our Facebook page, and I'm terrible, and I admit this. I'm terrible at answering them. I try to answer all of them on air because I don't spend a lot of time on the Facebook page. But we got a good one here. This is from Dan. He says he's heard us talking about running divers when on the hook. Could you tell us more about this? Okay, my grammar is horrible too. How deep of water are you targeting, and when it's best to fish like this? Well, a diver out of the boat is really, it falls down to the situation that you're in. So Dan, it's not something that you would say on the anchor is the primary or preferred way to fish, okay? Typically, having a lead dropper on there is going to keep your baits in specific spots, at least to keep them separated. So if you're going to run a diver out of a boat and you got multiple rods, just keep in mind that that diver rod is going to be moving all over the place with the current. No matter what the situation is, it's not going to stay in one spot. So if you are running a diver and you've got dropper rods that are out there with lead on there, they're going to be positioned in one spot, and that thing is going to be moving. So number one, make sure that it stays away from those rods, or run all the rods with divers. And there's any number of places that you can use it. You can run the jumbo jet divers from Lure Jensen 50 feet down. They will literally dive 50 feet. We've used those with 6-foot droppers and wobblers in deep water on the Columbia for fall Chinook. So there's a number of places that you can use it. But to answer your question specifically, if I was going to run a diver, typically out of the boat on the anchor, it's going to be shallower water, that 15-foot or under. And I'm probably going to be chasing springers or maybe steelhead, depending on the time of year. But typically, if I'm thinking about that style of fishing and when I'm going to be doing it, it's going to be on the Willamette, probably going to be, again, in that 15-foot range. And it's going to be with a size 20 or a Magnum diver from Brad's. What that'll do is help get that bait down there, and if the water's swirling around, it'll let those baits swirl around, and it is a pretty natural presentation, and it works very, very well. It's not something that I would say I would do every time, but if I get into a spot where there's a lot of swirling water, and you want to let that, maybe it's even a shelf that's behind the boat where it's in like 8 or 9 feet to one side of the boat, and then it drops off into 12, 15 feet, it lets that diver migrate and let those baits move around. Again, if you've got rods with lead, you don't want to let them intermingle because things can get ugly in a hurry, but you can do it. Dump that rod a little bit further out so that it stays away from those lead lines, and you should be good to go. It's sometimes a nice way that you can get just another bait back there that's not going to interfere with other things, and sometimes that's the rod that'll get bit. But you can run a number of different things behind it. If it's bait or if it's another plug, I prefer any time that I'm running a diver, I like having a dropper. You can absolutely get away with not using a dropper. You can use longer droppers. You can use a shorter dropper. I like the idea of that diver being able to move so that when I do hook a fish, it's not interfering with how that fish is fighting, right? It just gives you a little bit more room to mess around with those fish. You can run a plug behind them, a number of different ways to do it. So, Dan, to, again, answer your question, that 15-foot range or under, typically I would have like a prawn on there or coon shrimp, glob of eggs and a spin glow, something like that to let that thing kind of bounce around. So, Dan, I hope that answers your question. All right, we'll be back in just a minute. We've got a great Sunday show lined up for you. We'll give you that in just a couple minutes.